everyone. It's Deb with the UAP Medical Coalition. Today I have Roger. I'm going to let him introduce himself. He's here to talk to me about some of the cultural differences between Australia and the United States, and of course, the rest of the world. Roger, can you please let people know who you are?
Yes, my name is Roger Stankovic. I am the National Director for MUFON in Australia and New Zealand, and I I was a a researcher, um, UFO investigator prior to being involved with MUFON. And my educational academic background is in neuroscience. I completed a Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Sydney. Then later on, I continued my research in motor neuron disease and completed a PhD in motor neuron disease.
Well, I asked you here today to let us know a little bit about some of the differences between what's going on in Australia and, say, the rest of the world. What is it like for people who are interested in UFOs or UAPs in Australia in general?
We've got a keen interest. The public is pretty keen on the topic of the UFO phenomenon here. Um, I can say that with, with with some confidence because we've got a very large, comparatively speaking, a fairly large membership with our MUFON um, organisation in Australia compared to worldwide, except for obviously America, who has a much larger interest in the phenomenon than most countries. So there's an interest in the phenomenon by the general public, but the our federal government is not really doing anything. They're not involved in UFO research since the 90s. So 1995, the Australian Air Force was involved in gathering reports from pilots and military personnel, and ever since then, they have divested that job to the UFO organisations around Australia, which is good for us, but not good in the sense that um, pilots very rarely do report um, UAPs to organisations like the private organisations for UFO research. So currently, there's a massive gap between when the Air Force had dropped reporting UFOs in the mid 90s till now, and what I have done is, um, well, I've advertised for pilots that might see a UAP to report it to MUFON on my website, which might get some pilots reporting their sightings, because it is an issue here. Obviously, our airspaces are less, um, not as busy as what they are in the States and in Europe, but the the risks still associated with a collision or are still there, albeit um, the chances are slightly lower. Um, so so basically, the government isn't really interested. I've lobbied the federal government. I've actually um, communicated with the deputy prime minister and who's also the minister of defence, and they are just basically stating that they're not in a position to spend resources and money in in studying UAPs anymore. So it's really disappointing, and I just wish we had the same interest politically in our political representatives that there is in the United States, because we really look up to your senators and and their veracity in bringing this topic up in Congress and legislating for it. So I think that's a really giant step towards some form of disclosure, if it's not a full disclosure.
I do believe that you do have at least one politician who's interested, and I think
We
Grant
do.
LaValk had spoken to that politician. So it looks like it's not politicized so much in Australia, but there's the one.
There is one, and I have contacted him, and I didn't get a response from Senator Wish Wilson, who's a Greens. He's a Green. Well, we've got a party called the Greens, and they're obviously mainly involved in the environment. And he's a Tasmanian representative. Who it's great that we do have at least one Senate parliamentary representative who will have the tenacity and the courage to get up and speak in a parliamentary setting when you've got a lot of senators which are still ridiculing the subject, like Senator Wong, who even laughed, just did a snicker when he mentioned UAPs, and she said, "Well, are you talking about UFOs?" And it was quite embarrassing and very discouraging to see a senator like that ridicule the topic after all that's happened. Obviously, she's not keeping in good stead with regard to where the topic is currently in the United States of America. And in fact, a lot of the senators here do not really keep up to date with what's going on, which is really quite, I don't know, fascinating and quite disturbing at the same time. So I intend pushing this further with Grant. Grant's sort of like pushing it. He's got a petition in. We only got 700 odd people that signed it, including myself. It has been presented at the House of Representatives, but I don't know whether it's been taken seriously, considering the numbers that have signed it. It's very difficult to involve people at this stage because it hasn't got the high profile that it has in the States. Although you will find individuals. I mean, we've got close to 70 odd people that have signed up that are paid members of MUFON in Australia, which is quite high when you consider that they're people that are actually paying to join an organisation which they'll just get a newsletter for. So we have field investigators here. We've got a proportionally large number of field investigators per population. Like when you normalize the number of people involved in studying UFOs at the level of an organisation here in Australia, there's quite there's quite a large number of people. It's a bit like the United States, where the number of people involved in organisations in the United States that are studying MUFON is by far greater than any other country you'll find, apart from probably the UK and Australia. So it's encouraging to see that the civilian population here is interested in it, and we do have several different groups. There's a group in Queensland. There's these groups that were there for quite some time. They have a history behind them. Some even older than the MUFON, which started in '69. And they're very keen. They produce good newsletters. The public get involved. They have face-to-face meetings. I presented at seminars at these other organisations that are around. So it's good to see that, but I think that we've got a long way to go to get to the stage where we can claim that that we're as heavily involved as the United States is.
Well, what do they do to help the people who are coming forward who are saying that they have either observed a UAP or had some kind of encounter, or maybe even like some medical issue or psychological issue related to UAP? Is there something in place to support those people?
So, you're talking about the government or the private organisations or MUFON?
Well, I would think this it's the civilian groups that are taking care of this, it sounds like. So how are they treating people who are talking about having experiences?
So, we've got in MUFON, I can only speak for MUFON, so I'm not quite sure what big private organisations are doing, but we've got what's called an ERT team, which is an experiencer researcher group. We've got specialised field investigators which actually interview these people and gather information, and we put that information into our database. Um, we have usually have people that are trained in psychology that are interviewing these people. So there's some feedback um, mechanism which um, you can imagine that would happen in a clinical situation. But in terms of getting them involved in seeing a professional medical person for injuries they might have other than psychological, there's no mechanism in place at the moment that I know of.
So you don't have anyone who is specializing in assisting people that are talking about UAPs. How's the psychology field handling the topic? Does it seem like any like there's some acceptance
We,
in?
we, we yeah, we do have people who, and they're few and far between, but there are psychologists who have contacted me who want to get involved in actually. Uh, I'm, I can't say that um, they would probably get involved to a certain degree because being a trained psychologist, you would expect to be paid to do this work because it's time that's taken up. But I think I've made it clear to everyone that we're a voluntary organisation. So the time spent in actually interviewing people, as you know, that have had um, an experience that have psychological problems due to that experience, that would have to be on. It won't be a paid position. So basically, I think that they're aware that they would have to spend their own time and money and effort to interview these people and somehow give them some feedback, some methods of coping with ontological shock, etc., with the experience. And so um, we do have people now that are coming forward um, that have contacted me in the field of that are actually qualified psychologists that are actually still active within the field who are willing to participate and help uh, people who have had these experiences, who have had close encounters with UAPs. And yes, there are people willing to do that at the moment, but there's no real, apart from the ERT in MUFON, there's nothing here that's associated with the medical profession that is in place where um, someone who's had an experience can actually go to that person, knowing that they know a bit about UAPs and will believe in the witness and actually do something for them based on their experiences.
So in the United States, there's been a lot of pushback in general, both with mental health and with UAP experiences related to stigma.
Yep.
So there's been a lot of issues with like what happened with one of your politicians, people being laughed at, people telling them they're crazy. Are you seeing the
Yeah.
same thing in Australia?
Well, we haven't got to that level yet because I think the civilian population or whoever's been in the contactees are reluctant to actually divulge that information. I don't really know of any instances where there's been pushback because I don't know of any instance where someone's actually gone to a medical professional and stated that they have had a UAP incident apart from one person. Um, and Yeah, I mean, I suppose the number of instances where that happens in Australia, where you've got someone that's had a close encounter with a UAP because we've got a smaller population, and uh, it'd be a rarer event, I guess. And also, I think that yeah, I don't know of that actually happening in Australia simply because people aren't reporting it. They might just say that they've got depression and they've got anxiety, but they may not necessarily say why. And if it's because of a UAP encounter, they probably not actually even mention that to their psychiatrist or and due to the Privacy Act, I can't get into the data anyway.
Yeah.
I don't
So
have
in
access to the
addition,
data.
to ERT from MUFON, which is, as some people may know, an international organization, um, there's not really a lot of opportunities for someone to get medical or mental health help related to UAPs in Australia, is what it sounds like.
Correct. Yeah. There's nothing really in place at the moment, but I know.
And did you know if anyone in Australia has been doing any serious research on experiencers?
Apart from one of our field investigators, who is her position is just to interview alleged abductees. So um, basically, we have got people who are not associated with MUFON, or might have been at one stage, who um, a qualified hypnotherapist who actually charged to um, regress people and go through their abduction experience and uh, um, go into giving them some help in terms of realization of what they went through. And but that's about it. We don't have anyone that's actually medically qualified who is going to specifically look at people who have had experiences with UAP and have had psychological or, let's say, ontological shock, psychological problems, and physical injuries due to UAPs, as far as I'm aware.
Okay, what's interesting about that is, well, why don't you tell us what the healthcare system is like in Australia in general, if you can?
I'm not an expert on the healthcare system, but allegedly it is better than the healthcare system in the States. That's what I've been told. Basically, we have what's called Medicare. So basically, the government will rebate you if you see a medical specialist. The fees are quite high, and most people have private health cover. So we're taxed at about 1.5 to 2% of our income, which goes into Medicare, and that slush fund is used by the government to actually supplement the charges that most clinicians are going to charge you to see a doctor or a GP. Some of the general practitioners who are at the forefront of uh, seeing the the general public when they first have a complaint. Most do not, um, uh, I forgot the term for it, but bulk bill. So what we mean by bulk billing is not charging the patient. So some general practitioners do bulk bill, but the majority now do not bulk bill. So when every time you see a general practitioner, you have to pay for the consultation. Um, that's been increasingly the case because I think the federal government's feeling the pinch that the Medicare levy is not actually um, high enough, and the fees that the clinicians are charging um, are far in excess of what the government believes they should be charging. So the gap there must be paid by the consumer. So the system here is reasonable, um, but um, we have a problem with actual people that are medically qualified. Our university entrance levels are extremely high, um, probably like in other countries, but even so, it's worse here. So you'd have to be in the 99.9 percentile um, at high school during the school certificate exam to get into medicine. And these days, you can't even get into medicine straight out of high school. You'd have to do a degree and then apply as a graduate. So most people, especially, I think the University of Sydney has a graduate medical program, which I was involved in, and I was involved in interviewing students after after they sat what was called a GAMSAT exam. So basically, we have to import uh, people from overseas, and that's a problem. There's always a shortage of GPs, especially in rural areas. Um, and I've spoken to one person who you referred me to recently, who I knew before, who is having problems. He's an experiencer. He's had injuries due to close proximity with UAPs, and basically he's finding it extremely difficult to find a GP out in the rural areas of Australia. GPs don't want to go into the rural areas. They're sparsely populated. They're difficult to. It's Australia's quite arid. Most of the population's around the coastal regions. The facilities that are there. You've got um, the beaches and the cities, etc., are all on the coast. Obviously, if GPs are sometimes asked to go to regional areas in their training, but they don't stay there unless they've got their family in regional areas. They'll usually just migrate back to the city. So that's the problem. And some of these UAP encounters, especially the close encounter ones, will happen in regional areas, and therefore you'll have people like this person that I'm talking to you about now, who are finding it extremely difficult to get medical care, and it's really frustrating and very disturbing that that's happening.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is just like in the United States, where there seem to be lots of incidents that are happening over the desert. The
Yeah,
incidents are happening in less populated areas, and that's the area that may not have as many doctors because
yeah,
Australia is also having difficulties with having a qualified doctors because the standards are very high for someone to
exactly.
become a qualified doctor. Okay, just wanted to summarize that. Um, so at this point in time, what do you think needs to be done in Australia that's not being done related to the medical and psychological issues? What's happening to change any of that, if anything? What do you think can be done?
I think that it has to be UAP. The issue of UAP has to be acknowledged at the federal government level. Um, that has to happen first, because then you'll have a trickle down effect, I suppose, where if the federal government acknowledges UAP, and even just acknowledges it in a statement, they don't necessarily have to form an organisation like Arrow, which was one of my questions to the Deputy Prime Minister. I stated that we should have an organisation like Arrow where UAP reports by non-civilian population can be monitored and reported. Um, but even if we don't, even if they don't want to go there in terms of formalising an organisation where we've got a reporting system that's involved with the federal government and the military, they should at least acknowledge it, and then possibly look into legislation where if a patient went to hospital and stated that they had an incident with UAP, and whether it was ontological shock or whether it was an injury, physical injury, to not ridicule that patient, so that it this stigma could be uh, normalized, not normalized, but uh, so the stigma could be
Overcome.
overcome. And thank you. And so basically, that there won't be any hesitation for people to actually go to their GP or their psychiatrist. I had a UAP encounter when I was a teenager, and in my 30s, I had depression and I had anxiety, and I actually mentioned that to my psychiatrist, because I just had to just put it out there, and he raised his eyebrows and wrote something down on a bit of paper on his notes, and then equated it to a religious experience. And I sort of like thought to myself, well, because I asked him, I said, look, what do you think about that? And he said, well, I think that UFOs are a bit like, it's a belief system, and basically, it's if it, it's something like religion. If you believe in, if you're whatever denomination you are, it's got to do with you believing in something. And I said, no, I actually had an experience. So there was he wasn't um, dismissive of it, but because he wrote notes about what I was telling him. But um, yeah, so basically, going back to your point, I think that there should be an acknowledgement, and possibly even something in legislation which will alleviate any stigma from anyone coming to a hospital or seeing a medically qualified person, whether that be a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or someone in the emergency room, or whatever. If there's some sort of acknowledgement by the federal government, well, then perhaps more people will come forward and be looked after, rather than being left in the lurch and having to cope with their symptoms and depression and anxiety on their own, which is what I did for years. I had panic attacks as well. Not sure whether they were associated with the UAP encounter, but I had panic attacks when I was a child, and not sure whether that was related to UAP encounters. But I was left undiagnosed for years and years, and it had an extremely traumatic effect on me.
It's unfortunate. I'm very sorry to hear that. I think it's very difficult for people to have to repress or to edit something that they're trying to say to someone that they're supposed to have a trusting relationship with, in order
Mm,
to talk about the things they need to talk about. So to not be able to talk about it, or to have someone basically reframe it in a way that it doesn't match for you. Like,
Mm.
it's very difficult. Like, I'm trying to imagine if you saw an airplane and you went to your doctor and you said, "I saw an airplane," would they say that was a religious experience? No. It's just so like I think they don't understand,
No,
the that by definition a UFO is an object that we don't know what it is. We are basically confused and confounded when we see it. Um, that's why we're reporting it, because we're confused. We don't know what it is. We'd love for someone to tell us, you know? Some people
exactly.
speculate about what they may be, but it's not helpful for someone to say, "Oh no, you didn't see that at all."
Yeah, I know.
It's a
Yeah,
challenge. Hmm.
it is. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, if I can, if you're familiar with anything related to the they don't like to use, as far as I understand, the term Aborigine anymore. I believe that is being slowly taken out of the picture,
Well,
but the Indigenous Australian people, um, do you have some understanding of their history with this topic?
um, I'm not really. I know that there is some. There are uh, artifacts that reflect that they may have had some interaction with UAP many thousands of years ago. But I'm really not that familiar, unfortunately, with the Aboriginal groups which have experienced this and left the legacy of artifacts which reflect. And I haven't really spoken to. It's in Australia. It's difficult to come across Aboriginal people because they're very sparsely populated in Australia. They're usually in regional areas, and so we don't usually living in the city. You'd hardly ever come across an Aboriginal. Um, so it's something that I'd have to drive up to Broken Hill or some remote area in New South Wales or to actually to get to interact with them because they've they've got their own communities which they live in, and they haven't assimilated very well with um, the non-indigenous population, and basically they probably look upon us with a bit of contempt in the sense that we've taken their land and we have to. It's customary now to acknowledge their um, their lands before we even um, uh, even as a teacher we have to acknowledge Aboriginal uh, lands before we actually teach them, and it's customary to do that now. It's in fact it's probably part of legislation that you have to do that. So basically, it's difficult to interview them, um, and yeah, my knowledge in that field is fairly limited. So sorry, I can't really comment on that
I
to any
have
great extent.
seen one paper about it, and it's been some time since I read it, but the paper basically indicated that the experiences that they had were very much like the experiences the rest of the world has had in their encounters. Um, with the exception, of course, that some people think their cave drawings from long, long time ago, maybe
Yep,
reflecting interactions that had occurred because they look so much like what people call aliens and alien grays. I think that, I would prefer to ask an indigenous person that rather than make those assumptions.
yep,
Um, but the overall picture that I understand is that their experiences are very much like the rest of the population of the planet.
right.
Um, do you know of any differences between Australian encounters and encounters in the rest of the world, or are they pretty much the same to you, or do you see differences?
Um, there are similarities in the sense that there's some classical cases where we've had some people have allegedly been abducted, or interacted with a UAP on whilst driving. We've got or flying an aeroplane. We've had an encounter which was similar to what happened over one of the Great Lakes in America, where a plane had was tracked on radar with an unidentified object, and the two plots had merged on radar, and that plane was lost, and the pilot was never found. And we had a similar incident here in Australia where a gentleman called Frederick Valentich in the early 80s or late 70s was flying from Melbourne to King Island over Bass Strait, and had a UAP encounter where he radioed back to the air traffic control that he had spotted a UAP and it was circling him. And during the conversation, you hear a metallic grinding sound, and his plane just disappears and he disappears. There's been an instance where a UAP had allegedly lifted a car off the road and dropped it back onto the road, and the car blew a tyre. Several people in that vehicle, all related, all family members. We've had some other classic cases which I can remember. Let me think.
Westall.
Westall, yeah. So very similar to the Zimbabwe aerial school incident where several hundred students were involved in, and teachers were involved in the sighting of a UAP, or what was called then the flying saucer. So, and this tends to happen worldwide. I know that in Wales there was a schoolyard sighting by several students. There's also been one in Australia, one in Zimbabwe, and I think there have been some in the United States, but I cannot remember which school it was. But I do remember there was an incident in the United States where there were schoolyard sightings of UAPs. So
Also New Guinea, with
sorry.
Father Gill in New Guinea.
Oh yes, yeah, that's right. Yes, Father Gill. Yes, in Papua New Guinea. Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah. So I can draw similarities between what's happening here in Australia and in the United States. As far as crashes are concerned of UAP, they are not that common here, mainly because I suppose it's a very sparsely populated country. There have been some reports. I think Bill Chalker had been one of the researchers, one of the prominent researchers in Australia. Bill Chalker spoke about an incident that happened in the 70s where a UAP was witnessed to have crash landed, but the details on it are a bit sketchy. I was also notified by an individual who stated that he saw a UAP get stuck in a tree, and from a different location, and it was actually reported to the police, where the police came and investigated, but the UAP had actually dislodged itself from the tree and took off. So that there were multiple witnesses in that event in Perth. That happened in the 80s. Yeah, I think usually people report just seeing a light in the sky in the night, and behaving oddly. But we do have the occasional report where there's physical evidence. We've had a recent case where a lady was driving from southern central Queensland to a town called Charleville, and she had an encounter with what might have been a UAP. She spotted something on the left-hand side of her vehicle, which she thought was a plague of locusts because it was green and it was like a cloud, but came down, and it whether the wake of the object, because it was traveling at quite a fast velocity, actually pushed her vehicle to the other side of the road. And then she had to obviously correct um, go to the other side of the road, but she was completely frazzled by it. Um,
Imagine
and
going through that. No, let's just
I
stop for a
know,
moment and think about it.
yeah,
Imagine you're driving and you see what you think is a whole bunch of locusts and they push your car and then you can't tell your doctor. Imagine
I
not being
know.
able to tell
She,
your
she
doctor.
she actually went through a lot of stress, anxiety, etc., etc. The weird thing about this is that we sent a dust sample to a laboratory, and they did energy dispersive X-ray microanalysis on this dust and found an anomalous alloy on her vehicle, which was 80% copper and 20% barium, which we don't really manufacture on Earth. We can do a powdered form of it, but not at that level of 80%, 20%. So we found an anomalous alloy on her vehicle to substantiate her claims. But she did, yeah, she's still going through quite a bit of anxiety. This happened in May this year. And so she's talking to me, and she feels a lot better because she's actually got her story out there, and she's spoken to one of our field investigators who's in the ERT team, who has spoken to her about her experience, and gave us some just a sounding board for her to actually to relate to someone who actually believes in her, and who can actually offer some form of comfort in terms that we can, we actually um, believe in what she experienced, where she has probably received a bit of um, skepticism in um, through other sources. Um,
It occurs to me to ask, since CRT is providing assistance, does ERT have any kind of support group for people in Australia to talk about things? Because I've been told by people who provide assistance to experiencers that support groups are helpful so that they can feel like they're not the only one. Is there anything like that that you know of?
there might be. I personally I don't know of a support group, although there I could be mistaken because there could be one, but I'm not aware of it. It's not that we don't have a support group within MUFON, and so I usually restrict my jurisdiction to what happens in MUFON, but there might be a UAP support group out there that for people who are experiencing difficulties in terms of ontological shock of the experience. I should make an inquiry about that actually, and then possibly suggest that to her. But because it's such a large country, might have a support group in one state, and then it's difficult. I suppose you can go online these days as well. So um,
Yes, I've noticed that some people turn to trying to get support through places like Reddit, or they might reach out to one of the other groups. Like I believe Queensland has a group also, and hope
right,
for the best. But it seems like people, since they don't always know, and if you don't know, they won't know for sure, right?
yeah,
They may just keep it to themselves and then just
yeah,
go on being stressed and grasping at straws to try to get some assistance for it, and they're not telling their doctors, it sounds like. So
yeah.
it's kind of a mess.
It is a mess, yeah, and it's only going to get worse if there's more disclosure and um, people. I think even people who don't experience UAP encounters or may not, have know much about it. If there's some ontological shock with the realization that this is a real phenomenon and we don't have control, um, over our, airspaces or oceans or space in general, people can, you know, panic and get stressed about it. So something to not look forward to, I guess.
Well, it's something to be prepared for if we
Yeah,
can. One thing that's worth noting, though, is that Australia is one of the Five Eyes. In other words, one of our major allies in the world. And it has been said that, a Canadian politician let out that there have been
Larry
meetings
Maguire.
related.
Yep.
Yeah, there have been meetings with the Five Eyes, and that includes Australia. So even though Australia may be publicly pretty quiet or laughing or whatever, or denying acknowledgement, not only do I think that is false, that there's definitely something going on, but Australia has certain areas. I believe, is it Pine Gap is one, that has had
Yes.
international bases. Like the United States has had a base there and done projects there. Um, so we're in Australia as well. So I think that there's some, how do I put this? You know, magician trickery kind of illusion happening when they say they're not paying any attention and then they're going and having meetings and
Yes.
oh,
Yes, I know
so
what you mean. Yeah.
mhm,
Yep.
interesting.
Yeah. So the the NRO, National Reconnaissance Organisation, actually is involved in Pine Gap, I believe. I'm in contact with an intelligence community person, um, and I'm being fed some information, um, albeit minuscule. I suppose I'm being thrown breadcrumbs, but basically, I know what you're saying. We do have a Five Eyes representative, and I've tried to work out who that actually is, and I think I might know who it is, but apparently we're not supposed to know who that is. And we're trying to work out whether that Five Eyes representative went to a meeting in, I believe, May 22, or no, it wouldn't have been May 22, would have, because I think Arrow was formed in July 22, so it would have might have been after that. To see whether one of our Five Eyes representative was at that meeting, um, and yeah, pretty well being stonewalled all the way. So I put in a few foyers to work that out, but even yeah, so basically, it's interesting that if our Five Eyes representative is involved in these UAP meetings, which I imagine they would be because it's of importance to the American government, and so why wouldn't they involve, you know, um, their alliance countries in the issue? And and it seems to be just um, paradoxical that the federal government, if it is involved in Five Eyes representation of the UAP phenomenon, that they are saying to the public that we have no interest in this topic. And they can't be that naive and that blind to see what is going on in the United States. That we've got, people intelligence like David Rush coming in testifying under oath at Congress in a major congressional hearing. Um, Surely that information is being fed into our political milieu. I mean, surely, they must know about it. Um, they've got to keep their ears to the ground to know what is actually going on in the world. And this is, if it is real, is absolutely one of the biggest stories of all time. And why would they not be interested? It just seems quite unusual that
Well,
they
I
seem
think
to put this facade that they don't want to know, or they don't think it's important, but yet behind closed doors, something else might be happening. Sorry to interrupt you.
yeah, I was just gonna say I think we're past if. I think the government has,
Yeah,
in the United States, has been saying for a long time that this is a real concern, a really
yeah,
long time. In fact, that was something I debated with people today. In the 1970s, a United States group sued government for FOIAs. The Washington Post did an article about it. There were at least 500 government documents released to that group. A lot of those are the ones we now see on the CIA's website. But there are so many other documents that have highlighted the ongoing interest well into the 90s and the 2000s. It was not just in 47 or 50. It was all
mm,
these decades the government has been interested in this and concerned about this.
mm,
Granted, it was initially because of the Cold War, but I think the point is it's a real concern. It's always been a real concern, and they didn't want the public to be overly stressed about it. It sounds like Australia may have the motivation of not wanting to put the money into it right now, because they don't want to have to train people and prepare people, and they're getting away with people just dealing with it on their own and going to move on. But I know that's a cynical of view, but it's definitely real, and people should be preparing, in my opinion.
yeah. And I totally agree with you. And I just sometimes I'm just um, dismayed as to why, yeah, our federal government won't take this topic seriously. It's just incredible. But as I said before, I mean, there could be something that's going on behind closed doors that we don't know about. And I've got a feeling that an inkling that might be the case because our Minister for Defence is interested in um, topics on about life in the universe. He's actually made statements about it uh, that have been reported in articles online where he's got an interest in space exploration and life on other planets. So it's interesting that this is why I targeted him. So I thought, okay, well, um, he's interested in life on other planets. So I thought I'll contact him and see whether if he's interested in contemplating doing something similar to what the United States has done with Arrow. But as soon as I contacted him, that was just that stone, well, not stonewall, but I got the impression that they weren't. That might have been his private feeling about it, but wasn't reflected in Parliament. And whether it's um, also a combination of a number of different parliamentarians who are against, or not against, but um, have a negative feeling towards this phenomenon, and whether that school of thought is actually preventing other people who may have some closeted feeling about their beliefs in UAP that could be preventing them from actually saying something in Parliament, other than Senator Bush Wilson, who has actually bought this, but then was actually ridiculed in Parliament by another senator. So,
Well, maybe Australia thinks they'll be the only country in the world that can just have UFOs flying around without worrying about their national security. But I think the rest of us are publicly starting to admit that we should be concerned about that. Brazil
mm,
has their Senate hearings, Mexico just had a hearing, the United States has had at least, I think it's now 5 different congressional events in its history total.
mm,
And although some of them were called subcommittees, but they were still congressional events. There's also been UN interests, like people have gone to the UN and talked, and they're still trying to do that now with Project Titan, right?
yeah,
So I'm hoping that they'll be more public with their honesty, or I should say, be more publicly honest in the future about what's going on, because it sounds like there's a great need for some training, and it might be worth it to let your government know that peer support training is also possible and much cheaper if they're concerned about the expense, right?
Mm,
Let's get some people who are ready and prepared to help other people. I don't think it's fair for everyone to walk around holding that in, you know?
mm.
So,
Well,
I
I
mean,
intend working on our senators a bit more with Grant, and I think there's a few, as I said, closeted senators which might um, come out of the closet if you actually encourage them and gang up to actually make this an important issue in the House. So sorry, uh, keep going.
hey, you have great people on your side. You've got Grant and you've got Ross
Ross
Coulthard.
Coulthard, yep,
Yeah, and you've got Channel 7 was willing to put all of those documentaries out. Like those are all tremendously important things. And,
yep,
Ross is so incredible that he has been all over our news and in tons of podcasts
yes,
talking about it.
that's right. Yeah.
Um, so I think that there's some hope, and I hope that other people in Australia will try to get involved with helping each other, and maybe talking to their politicians about getting some more engagement. It must be frustrating, I imagine, to see this happening somewhere else and not see the progress there. I apologize. I can imagine that's very frustrating. But maybe it'll happen soon.
Yeah, we've just got to keep pushing and working out, thinking outside the box, and trying to see how we can get this uh, issue some legs, I suppose. um, yeah, but it's going to be a hard slog, as
Okay.
we
Well,
to use the vernacular.
I only have two more questions for you today. One is, what about scientists? Have any serious scientists been publicly involved in this topic in Australia?
I think that most of the scientists that are involved in this topic have had experiences. So, um, apart from that, you might get a scientist that isn't an experiencer, so that might, like myself. Sorry, I am an experiencer, so that's why I got involved. But uh, just as uh, a recent incident that I had an astronomer who actually qualified astronomer who contacted me by email and said, "I'm interested in what you're doing in MUFON, but I feel that the subject isn't taken seriously in a scientific level." And I tried to I replied and said, "Well, we are. That's one of our vision statements is to look at UAPs in a scientific way by gathering evidence through, physical um, physical evidence. We If it's a sighting, if it's a video, or if it's something that we can look at to eliminate prosaic reasons, we use our resources to do that. But it wasn't enough to actually encourage him to actually join. So I think that a lot of scientists would look upon getting involved at the scientific level, and we do have a team of scientists um, who are connected in a network that work in laboratories, who can do analysis of physical evidence. So this is what I mentioned to you about the dust sample that from this lady's vehicle. So we do have a network of people um, who have an interest in this phenomenon and who work in laboratories, and officially we can send them samples to analyze. So we do have resources that we can tap into in existing laboratories that can do this work for us. Um, but
But are they public?
they're not public. Well, they they actually refuse. There's some pushback for publication of their material, and we've had they've written up reports, and I've read them where they've analysed several bits of material. They could be a metallic fragment of a UAP or a dust sample or whatever, and they're brilliant reports. They're absolutely something that you could easily publish in a scientific journal. So what I'm doing is putting a couple of their reports together and then publishing an article in the SCU, which is the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, because I think it's just a waste that this material is just being reported on, but just being kept in someone's filing cabinet. So it just seems a travesty. So basically, that will happen, and we we do have our membership in MUFON, uh, which involves professionals like retired policemen, private investigators. We do have people like myself who is um, in the medical profession or the scientific research background. Um, but yeah, we need more people engaged with a professional background, especially in science. And I find that when I go to meetings, the level of intelligence in the general room is extremely high. I just get that feeling. I've gone to seminars, and you think that you might meet people who are crackpots or tinfoil hatters. It's not the case. I've gone to seminars here where every 10th person has a PhD and are really interested in the topic. Um, and I went to a crop circle seminar where the presenter did have a PhD. He was a molecular biologist and discussing his theories behind the origins of crop circles and going through each selected crop circles and explaining what they meant. Um, I just have the feeling that like there is a lot of people out there. There are a lot of people out there who maybe don't even want to admit that they're interested, but are very, very keen or closeted, sort of like people who are extremely intelligent, professional people that are really interested in this topic. And the topic actually um, uh, lends itself to people who have, and I'm not including myself in this, but who have a superior intelligence, because it's fascinating. It's groundbreaking. It's something that is real. Is if we can prove that it is real, and well, we know it's real, but I mean, if we can um, somehow um, obtain some. No, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. If
Well, I have to agree with you that this subject touches on some of our more heady, let's just call it that, more intelligence required
yes,
topics
intelligence definitely required.
like anthropology, physics,
Yes,
history,
absolutely.
religious studies. Just it really goes into quite a lot. Literature,
It
even.
does. It
Wow,
does. Yes.
someone's racing outside my door again. Um, yeah, sounds like a large UFO outside. Anywho, I just wanted to say though, I think that yes, it truly is a very broad subject, and hopefully, this fear that people in Australia are dealing with regarding coming forward will be overcome. Because it sounds like there's a lot of people who are hiding their interest still, which is,
I
you
think so.
know, and it's still the case in the United States. That's why Valet referenced the Invisible College, because there's so many people who were
Yes.
interested, but just they couldn't be public because they were afraid.
I know
So
a couple of Twitter handles where I know that they're professional people, medical people, but they have well, I wouldn't call it a sock puppet, but an account
Alias.
where you don't put your name down. I've got my name in my Twitter handle, but a lot of people don't. They I don't know they're professionals and are keenly interested in this in the topic.
Well, Roger, that leads me to the last question, which is where can people find you? So if they have more questions, they can find you and engage with you on this topic.
So I've got a website, the MUFON Australia New Zealand website, which is just a Facebook site, which I'm not sure whether you can put links in these videos or anything like that when it goes on YouTube. But there's that website there, and I'm on Twitter. Um, they can contact me on my email address is actually on the Australian New Zealand website, so you can contact me directly off that email or on Twitter. Basically, that's basically it. I think.
Okay. Well, thank you so much and for coming today and kind of
No
highlighting
problem.
what's going on in Australia related to this topic, what's going on with how they're treating it and how they're treating experiencers. I truly appreciate you highlighting some of those things for us today. Hopefully, this conversation will make some of those other groups in Australia come forward and say, wait a minute, we have support groups or something like that and kind of educate us about that. I'd appreciate that. And thank you again for all that you do for everybody.
No worries, Thank you for having me on, and it's a pleasure talking to you. Deb.
Okay. Well, you have a wonderful rest of your day. And for everyone who is listening, thank you very much and take care.
Thank you.